So thank you again for joining. So today we're looking at the future of assessment. So I'll be your host this session along with my colleague Jenny. And so a little bit about both of us. So I'm an occupational psychologist and I specialize in leadership assessment, diversity, equity, and inclusion and culture. I've had the pleasure of working in this field for about 15 years and I've delivered programs and solutions to clients globally. I'm quite excited about today's session actually because I think it's a bit of a deviation from some of the usual webinars that I've run where I'm looking at something that's a bit more unknown. So I'm here to really explore with you and step into exploring the what could be and the what if of the field of assessment with you. In preparation for this session, we've actually engaged with our internal AI team, as well as senior leaders in assessment and leadership development. We've spoken to SMEs in assessment and neurodiversity. So hopefully, all of that knowledge together with everything that we do in our own practice, we can have a very productive session today with you all.
Thank you, Narita. So hi everyone, my name is Jenny, and like Narita says, or like Narita, I'm also an occupational psychologist, and I've been in leadership assessment for quite a long time. I've been at LHH since 2021, and here I look after assessment, culture change, and having keen interest in D&I. I previously worked for a company that assesses and coaches neurodiverse individuals, and whilst I'm glad there's people are a lot more conscious about it, but there is still quite a lot to be done in this area, particularly when it comes to assessment processes, and we'll talk about that later on. That's it. I'm going to hand it back to Narita.
Thank you. Fab, it's Boston in the US. Well, thank you for joining. Hope it's not too early. And Richmond, love Richmond, lived there for a little while. Excellent. So thinking about our Spotlight series, today is the final Spotlight we're running. Each Spotlight has aimed at really making assessment accessible and not just made for technical experts in the field. So we hope regardless of your background and comfort with assessment, these Spotlights will bring some insight for you and some useful framing for you to take back into your role or organization. As I mentioned, we're touching on two really important topics today. So this webinar is really going to focus on the future of assessment in light of artificial intelligence, AI, and neurodiversity. It's a bit of a gear change, but they're both very important topics, and we're going to look at the implications of those in the leader experience. So it's great to have you all here with us. We have 60 minutes together. And from a practical point of view, we have muted the lines for background noise, and we're definitely going to protect some time at the end for Q&A. So definitely keep using the chat. It's for questions, and we'll go through some as we come to the close of the session. And I think that's the housekeeping bit. So perfect. So let's get into it now. Okay. So the purpose of today's session is really to unravel some complexity. So topics are intentionally complex and we want to discuss them in line with your role and your organization. So we want to provoke some thinking and have an exploratory discussion of the what if. We want to ask ourselves some challenging questions and see what we want from the future of assessment, as well as where the market takes us. So how can we sort of take this information and take it forward? We want to share with you everything that we've discovered and share our point of view. So we've got a lot of information that I know is playing in the market, as well as some of the advances in technology and DEI, and we want to share what's our point of view and where we want to take this field forward. Importantly, every organization is different, so please take what's most meaningful for you, and we're always open to discuss that with you as well. So what's on the agenda? So today's agenda, we're looking at artificial intelligence in assessment. Then we're changing gears to neurodiversity and the drive for intentional inclusion within assessment. And then we're going to bring both of those topics together, look at the context they exist in, and talk about the assessment experience, so our vision for the desired state of play. And we're going to close with your questions, reflections, and reactions. So before we get started, I just want to set some parameters so we are all on the same page, really. So this is not a session on a deep dive of AI, and this is definitely not a session on a deep exploration of neurodiversity. Both those topics are topics in their own right, We could run webinars for weeks and weeks, and we wouldn't be able to cover everything that is out there to be known about them. So instead, we're putting a spotlight on these important topics in the field of leadership assessment and see what they could mean for us. Also, when I say future of assessment, I'm not thinking many years from today. So we are looking at what we could possibly achieve in the next 3 to 5 years. And finally, when I say assessment, I am referring to the end-to-end process of assessment. So this would include things like the psychometrics, perhaps the interview, it could be something experiential, it could be the 360 that they might complete. So the whole process of the assessment experience, so not just the psychometrics. So let's get started and look at artificial intelligence in the world of assessment. So I'd love to actually gather your thoughts before we delve into some of the content that we have here. And I think our own individual reactions to some of these topics is very important. So I'm going to ask you a question, which is when you think of artificial intelligence in the world of leadership assessment, we want to know what your hopes are. Where should this technology take us? And what are you concerned about? So I've got a couple of Menti polls for you. We'll start with hopes, and Jenny's going to be very kindly going to. Perfect. That's great to see some of the responses already coming in. So, yep, if you've got Menti going, or if you've got effective, balanced, human, love that. No cheating. Looking at consistency. Oh, do you just pop the code in the chat for me, Jenny, if it's handy?
Of course, let me just do it. Bear me a second.
Oh, yeah, it's just up towards the screen. Oh, they can see it now. Perfect. And Mita's done it as well.
Thanks, Mita.
I should say Mita is our producer, so she'll be helping in the delivery of it. Excellent. So I've got fairness coming up very strongly, less time consuming, absolutely. So what can we do to make the end-to-end process a bit more efficient? Honest, personalization, consistent, equity. So there is some of these thematically is really around keeping it human. So not really losing ourselves in some of that. So I think that's really amazing to see. Unbiased, honest, fairness, equity. Perfect. Thank you. So if we move to the second one, which looks at what are you concerned about? That's perfect. You know, well, we can actually capture these and send it with the recording as well. So really appreciate the input. Cold, I like that. Yeah, it can be quite like distant. Expedient, bias. Yeah, some of these.
One
Yeah.
on working the system. It'd be interesting if you wouldn't mind just putting in chat or come just to explain a bit more about that, because I'm quite curious about what that means.
Yeah, good shout. Yeah, and I think a lot of the words are feeling more distant. Like they seem like you don't want to remove the human touch or the warmth, oversimplified, so not really getting to the granular detail of it. Homogeneous, love that. Yeah, robotic. And yeah, and I love that bias is so big because there's a real problem at the moment in some of the areas that we'll explore as well.
It's actually interesting because on both sides, on the hopes, you're hoping for it to reduce bias, but at the same time, and which, as you said, we're going to talk about, is that concern of actually, what about bias? So it sits on both sides.
Exactly. So you want it to be fair, and how can you remove the bias? I think we had a chat response as well.
Yes,
And empathetic. Yeah, exactly.
Empathetic. Super.
Perfect.
Would you like me to move back to the slide?
Oh, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you so much for your input, and we'll share some of these words back with the recording. So thinking about that, and we can see then from what your responses have shared, it is important to explore it. So I'm going to touch a little bit on why we're exploring it, and then we'll look at some of the point of views. So what is artificial intelligence as a definition? We've looked at some of the academic as well as the practitioner type of definitions, and they really are about performing tasks that are commonly associated with human processing and making decisions that we would often liken to human decision making, but perhaps at a higher speed. So there's some of the definitions that really spoke to us. And essentially, if we move from here, it's not necessarily robots. And so every day we're already experiencing it. So you'd notice in some of the data processing that you might be involved in, how to access candidate information or selection or promotion information. Most of us have somehow interacted with ChatGPT, so they're called large language models of um, and so we've had some exposure to that kind of AI. And even if we don't sometimes want it, we do see predictive shopping ideas on social media, and that's a very common AI that we've probably all interacted with. So the idea, and I love some of the words that actually came up in the word cloud, because it really speaks to where we're interested in, where we're headed as well at LHH. So our view is that AI should really propel and drive impactful connections between people at work. So really thinking about all the words that came up under hope, that's what we want to be really harnessing as we move forward with this. So thank you for that. It's great to see that we've got alignment as well. And so, what's already happening in the marketplace? So, we know that at the moment, leadership assessment and AI are quite intertwined. It's happening already. Some of the main areas it's playing at is speed and strength of the analysis. So, some people may call it power, and the experience aspect of it as well. But some of your concerns that you've noted in the word cloud play into all of these, and so we need to be. And we'll talk about some of the watchouts in a moment as well. So some of the transformations we've already seen is making quicker sense of data. So data processing and analytics has really sped up in some instances. Prediction, so we're taking the data to say this person might fit this role. So that's happening already. And analysis of behavior. So we see that in some of the video interviewing tools. We see them in some of the, if you're completing a task, but then you're being watched and then looking at your body language. There is some evidence of bias reduction, but I've really put in brackets there at times. And I think all of you felt that way when you talked about your concerns as well. And we'll talk about that aspect. And we're seeing it intercept itself into feedback and coaching as well quite recently. So, one thing to remember about AI is that it is evolving and it's learning. And so it's only as good as the information that we put in it. So, always keeping that in mind when you are thinking about your role and organization. So we talked, and I love that we did I love the words that came up under the concern one. So some of the gains, with all the gains that we're seeing, there are naturally are some watch outs. So there's a watch out around chasing the shiny. So the new product that's out there, like virtual reality, for instance, and predicting behavior in that space. And does that actually align to your purpose of why you're assessing the leader or where your organization context is headed, the market challenges, your social challenges? So really thinking about the shiny versus your purpose. Social trends. So this is that bias reduction slash worries around bias really kicks in. So when we have had AI intercept coaching world, for instance, we do see there's a tendency to make recommendations that are aligned to the in group of the population. So some of the suggestions on how to behave might not actually suit the individual, but how the data has been filtered inside it to say that this is what good behavior is, but it's really just mimicking the in group. Similar with cheating and personality instruments, and I saw that come up in the concerns as well. It's really it's really telling you to behave in a certain way. So that's where I think some of the psychometric instruments, personality or cognitive, it's still quite well protected from that cheating because it doesn't quite work yet. And so it's something to look out for. The data quality as well. So again, it's like similar to the coaching example, thinking about what data you're using because it goes into a black box and it learns. So if you're not putting in the right information, it's learning the wrong thing, and that's where you do see disadvantages for ethnic minority or um, uh, race, gender, etc. So you do see DEI being quite impacted by the data quality. And the ethics. So when you are using everybody's data to make these predictions, do you have their permission? So thinking about those watch outs. But again, there is immense opportunity. So this is some of the hopes that we all discussed, and some of the hopes that we've uncovered at LHH with some of our research and talking to SMEs is there's a real push for the democratization of assessment. So what I mean by that is that there's a push to see a shift in power from I'm taking an assessment just to inform an organizational decision, to I'm taking the assessment so I can learn about myself and where I can take it further. So that shift in power to make it more accessible for people to really think about, with all the advances in AI, can we give these individuals real insight to drive their careers forward? Speed, absolutely. We talked about faster. So sometimes now that end-to-end process of assessment can take a while. And what we can do is process some of the data points with accuracy and permission, and give more real-time feedback. Another opportunity is thinking about job agnostic insights. So this is an interesting one around, if we are trying to democratize assessment or think about how we could shift the power, and we think about what context your organization is operating in. um, Perhaps you don't know what the role in the next 5 years would look like, or what your challenges in the organization might be. So, thinking about providing that individual and yourselves insights about fit that isn't tied to a job could really align your leaders for the future industry or challenges they could face. And the final one is growth. So, allowing the assessment process to really bookend programmatic development for leaders. So we'll talk about this later on as well, but there's a um, real drive to think about not a one-stop shop for assessments. Where do you take it forward, and what do you want to learn from it, and how can you give back? So if you think about your future of your organization, you've identified a gap. How do you develop these people from the insights from that assessment? And AI can support with those. So hopefully that's landed well with you, and really appreciate some of the input that you've already had. So I'll share our point of view now, and that really takes us, what I've done here is really taken everything that we know so far and what we're passionate about at LHH to say, what is it that we want to see AI do for us and propel that human experience. So we're really thinking about the words that came up under hope. So we want to keep that human connection. So, and create connections between leaders with colleagues, and then think about the human centricity of the process. So the 5 areas that we're quite passionate about, and we think where AI can really propel assessments, is that democratization process. So really thinking about what is it that we can give to the individual as insights. Let's sharpen our data analytics. So can AI help us really look at all of the data that we have in a fair way, and think about the insights that we can draw from that, keeping in mind some of the watch outs that we talked about in terms of bias reduction and the impact on DEI development. That's a core area of passion for us. So really thinking about, when we found what people are showing strengths in and showing development in, how do you then develop those people to make them future ready as individuals and for the organization? And then we have efficiency. So that's essentially the speed. So where can we cut some of the human time in a fair way to then make the real-time feedback more possible? And we're really purpose-driven. So why are we actually engaging to assess these leaders for selection, attraction, for succession planning? What's the point here, and what do you want to achieve strategically? And can we align to that, so not chasing the shiny? So I hope that lands well. I do have some questions for you. You don't have to answer them right away, but something to take away with. And for you and your role, and again, remember, every organization is different, so your maturity could be, on one end of the scale to the other. It doesn't matter. So just thinking about your vision for the future of assessment with respect to AI. So what do you have? I kind of feel we're at the cusp now where we have the power to kind of decide and make a difference within the organization. Are you aware of what your leaders actually desire in terms of the experience that they're after? And then also thinking about the purpose of development and assessment and what you're trying to achieve. The next topic, which is neurodiversity and drive for intentional inclusion. And I'll hand over to my colleague, Jenny.
Thank you, Narita. So what we're going to explore today is a bit more about, how can we, how does neurodiversity, what does that look like when it's in relation to assessment, and how do we make it more actually equitable for people who are neurodivergent? Now, before we look at the why we're looking at this topic, I think it's actually probably quite important to look at what do we mean by neurodiversity. So on the screen, you have quite a simple definition, but to put it even simply, that neurodiversity really refers to the different ways a person's brain processes information. So that can be how they think, how they learn, how they behave. What we're saying is actually there's no right or wrong way, they're just different ways of thinking about things or doing things. Judy Singer, who's the Australian sociologist who actually coined this term in the hope to promote that equality and inclusion of neurological minorities. When we talk about neurodiversity, we say it's actually diverse because it includes many, many different conditions. So the very commonly known ones are autism, ADHD, dyscalculia, dyslexia. They are less known ones, which includes executive dysfunction, slow processing and speed, stamina, as well as Tourette syndrome. Although I think with Lewis Capaldi, more people are getting to know Tourette's now, but also the impact it has on the person who has Tourette's. And let's not forget, even within the same type of neurodiversity, it can actually look very different from person to person. So, for example, when someone has, some autistic people can be highly functional, they can live independently, they're able to communicate verbally, they have, normal or higher than normal IQ, but they are other autistic people who might actually need more support and they might not be able to communicate their needs or feelings that well. So it's important when we talk about neurodiversity not to lump everything together and kind of assume that we're talking about one condition only. So that's what I mean by neurodiversity. Now, we believe it is important to look at neurodiversity in this context of assessment because up to 30% of the population identifies as neurodivergent. So that is around about 1 in 7 people in the UK having some kind of neurodifferences. The thing is, the landscape for neurodivergent individuals in the workplace is not actually as welcoming as it should be. So the studies that have shown unemployment rate for this group can be up to 8 times higher than the non-neurodivergent individuals. Also, if you think about stigma, a lack of awareness, and lack of appropriate infrastructure. So this could be how your office is set up, the staffing structure. All this can actually cause exclusion of people who are neurodiverse and actually make them feel less welcome. In our experience, when we speak to our clients or potential clients, there's often a panic of, I don't know what to do, how do we make adjustment when it comes to the assessment process? And when someone discloses that they're neurodiverse, it can be hard if you don't really feel like you know much about it. How do you make adjustment for it? How can you be more aware that you need to be intentional and make that efforts in your traction strategy to showcase that actually everyone can succeed in your organization? Just to give you a quick example of what stigma can look like, which is on the left-hand box. So for a lot of people, when they hear dyslexia, they tend to think about people who tend to experience the following challenges. So people, could be disorganized, particularly when it comes to time management, not great at note taking, and that's often related to do with the weaker working memory dyslexic people have. Low level of literacy, this can be, getting your words confused or just slow reading, or they could find it hard to maintain focus. So while I was doing my research, I looked at the British Dyslexic Association and they mentioned all these symptoms, but actually, interestingly enough, they didn't mention anything on the right-hand side box. And, when we think about the kind of things we could be focusing on are the ones on the right. So those who those who has dyslexia could actually tend to be good at these kind of things as well. So creativity, problem solving, and they're really good at, thinking about being empathetic, being in the other person's shoe. They're good at connecting dots. So thinking about, that big picture thinking, but also being quite entrepreneurial. So think about all the good qualities. Don't you kind of want to have more people with these qualities within the organization? By understanding that neurodivergent individuals can actually bring a whole host of strengths with them, and actually actively recruit them and adjust your process for them, can really help them to feel like, they can actually succeed within your organization, and you can actually tap into their strengths and excel as a company. But people can only excel and focus on the qualities on the right-hand side box if they feel that they won't be judged, and they will be supported on the things that they find challenging. Essentially, embrace who they are. So the key message here is that, understanding and embracing neurodiversity in all places, including the workplace, can actually improve the inclusivity of, for all people. And it's important for us to foster an inclusive environment for neurodiverse individuals and actually recognize and emphasize that we all have strengths and talents. So it's about focusing on those and also providing the support that they need for their differences and needs. So to embrace that neurodiverse population, we have to be intentional in our effort to include them, and we need to make it purposeful to actually unlock and untap the potential and diverse perspective. So in terms of assessment, we really need to think about how do we make the right adjustment to the assessment process so that the assessments are equitable for those who are neurodiverse. Because if we don't, it could actually limit those with neurodiversity. Examples of adjustment actually doesn't have to be really, really difficult. It could just be extra time because it takes dyslexic candidates longer to read, for example, or be clear about what you're actually assessing in a role play exercise, because autistic candidate may find it hard to understand exactly what's being assessed. We make these adjustments so that the results can be comparable to neurotypical non-groups. Just to clarify, if I haven't said it already, is that when we talk about assessments here, we're talking about the assessments for people to understand whether they're suitable for a role, not actually assessing whether someone has diverse conditions. Now, one of the main challenges today with assessing neurodivergent individual is that people actually don't feel safe or may not feel safe disclosing it, that they're neurodiverse. And this could be, for the reasons that were mentioned in the previous slide, that people don't know if people will hold negative preconception of them, judge them, or they may feel that actually, even if I disclose, nothing will be done. To give you a personal example, so before I came to LHH, I never disclosed to people at work, certainly not at the assessment stage, that I'm actually dyslexic. Simple reason, because I don't want people to think that I'm terrible at writing and that's the only thing they remember me for. So at LHH here in general, we see non-disclosure as unintentional exclusion because we can't actually make the right adjustment in the assessment process for them. So disclosure is actually the key to making the relevant adjustment, but it doesn't just happen. In the next slide, we'll talk about how to actually foster an environment where people will feel comfortable disclosing. Now, another problem with actually not disclosing is that currently the psychometric companies really rely on people to self-disclose so that they can create the relevant non-groups. If people don't disclose, non-groups can't be created. And don't forget, because neurodiversity is diverse, so we actually need to create multiple different non-groups so that we can actually utilize it. And this is why we're advocating to move from that intentional or unintentional exclusion to intentional equity and inclusion, so that people actually feel comfortable disclosing and we can make the right adjustment for them. And only when that happens can you move towards that culture of belonging that you see on the top there. And this is pretty much our point of view in the sense where, by bringing intentional equity and inclusion in assessment, we can actually create that culture of belonging. So what you need to do, first of all, is to foster actually an environment where people feel comfortable to disclose. For internal candidates or talents, this is about recognizing and emphasizing that each person's individual strengths and talents. So what that could look like is, for me, working at LHH has shown me exactly that. My colleagues, my managers, my manager's manager, they all focus on my strengths and come to me to help them out with challenging problems, for example, because I'm quite good at problem solving. This has kind of made me feel like, yeah, I'm quite confident about what I can do, but also that they know what I can do. So I was then more comfortable sharing the fact that actually I'm dyslexic and actually may require support on things like writing quite a long document. For external candidates, what that could look like is, in order to foster an environment where people feel comfortable disclosing, it's all about reflecting on your attraction strategy. So, for example, when candidates go on your website, do they see everyone can write? Do they see examples of neurodiverse leaders or talent sharing their stories? If you actually run your adverts through checks to see it's written in plain language without metaphors, do you actually put somewhere in the job advert to let people know that support will be given for or to neurodiverse individuals? Now, all these things will help a candidate see that actually maybe it's okay to disclose, maybe this company will be different. Once you know that an individual is neurodiverse, it's about providing support for their differences and needs in that end-to-end assessment process. The easiest thing actually is to have a conversation with them to understand, how their neurodiversity is impacting them at work. You could ask them, what kind of adjustment have they had previously, what kind of support to help them through the assessment process. Once you actually understand the challenge they face, it's then easier to adjust it. Kind of make it clear from the outset that what the recruitment process looks like, particularly before they start any assessment, and actually let them know what expected of them so they can actually evaluate where they're likely to be impacted during the process, if so, to what degree. And this way, you don't actually need to be an expert in diversity to make that adjustment because you've heard from them what is it that they need support on. That said, if you need support or you need help, we're here for you. And lastly, let's not forget the basics or the best practice of assessment. So think about utilising multiple data points and collect as much input as you can to assess someone's suitability for that particular role. For those who've attended the webinar too, you will see me drumming about the need for data. What we're saying is psychometrics shouldn't be the only data point. But if you want to use it, choose assessment that uses plain language in a test or positive language in a report. Make sure that they are robustly tested, researched. We recommend BPS certification, so that's British Psychology Society's certified. That's a good sign. And also that has high faceability. So essentially, when people take the assessment, they know what's that for. The important thing is don't force the candidate to undertake assessment if they don't really feel comfortable doing so. Find an alternative way to actually understand the capability. So things like work sample test where they physically perform a task rather than doing the psychometrics, or you can increase the weight of the interview as well. So think about different ways that they can actually adapt to it. So I know there's a lot to take in, but before we finish this section, I just want to, like Narita, leave you some questions to ponder, because there's a lot of questions. It's probably easy to ponder after the session. So what we want you to think about is, is it easy for people to disclose their needs at work? Do you kind of listen to their terminology? So if they use the word neurodiverse, autistic, or on the spectrum, do you kind of respect that and actually mirror that similar words that they're using? Is there an actively encouragement to actually celebrate differences during that assessment process? Do you kind of ask questions to bring out their positive points? And lastly, do you pay attention to context clues? By that we meant, not all neurodivergent individuals are comfortable talking about it, and some people might not be aware as well. So thinking about, paying attention to masking behaviours, action that suppresses people's natural inclination trying to fit in. So looking for signs such as nail biting, tapping, or chewing their hair. These could all be a telltale sign of actually they're quite nervous about something. Hopefully this session has given you enough food for thought. If you want to carry on discussion, we're here for you. With that said, I'm going to hand back to Narita.
Perfect, thank you. So the last section before we come to your questions, and I can see some questions coming in, so that's brilliant. And also in the chat we've had some. We're going to now take the two topics we've discussed and merge and think about their impact on leadership assessment. So, and mainly the experience of it. So a lot has been covered. We do appreciate that. So a bit of a recap. So under artificial intelligence, we talked about the democratization of assessment and making the person the center. We talked about data analytics and the power of insights, so thinking about what information you're feeding into the system to then get the powerful insights that you're actually after. Talked about the informing programmatic development, so having assessment inform how you actually then take that step forward. Speed, that's probably the area we've seen a lot of investment in for a lot of organizations. And so efficiency and quicker and easier with integrity and permission. And then thinking about the purpose of it all. Then you've heard Jenny talk about intentional inclusion for neurodiversity, which is around really celebrating those individual strengths and talents, fostering an environment for disclosure so that your attraction, selection, progression, even just talent map is fair, and thinking about celebrating those strengths of different people, and providing support for differences in the assessment. So it's not a one size fits all. As Jenny said, it's around a lot of the assessment process is thinking about assessing capability or assessing preferences, strengths. You can change up the way that you do that, so to be fair to the individual, and showing that everybody can thrive in the assessment process. So are there leaders who are happy to share their experiences? Do you have leaders that or senior individual contributors that have a neurodiverse fall into neurodiversity and can show that their success through their strengths as well? So underneath all of this for us is really that human centricity and connection. And and I'm so glad that we're all on the same page, because that came up on the hopes for you all as well. So what I'd like to now do in the next slide is just bring in the context that we play inside. So we've got AI as happening and a lot of organizations are embracing it. It's quite early days, so there's no longitudinal studies or anything to see the impact of it. But we are trying to experiment with it. So we've got that. We've got neurodiversity we need to recognize. And then we also know that we're playing in the context where we see from HR leaders in the first diagram on the top right, that an action or a result is the most important part of an assessment process. So they want to have development feed into it. In the bottom diagram, we see that the skills that we want from our leaders is really quite humanizing. So we want them to show empathy. We want them to show social intelligence, manage conflict in a personable way, and promote diversity. So we need to understand that it's all within this context. And so focused shift to the leader and what we can expect of them is what we're seeing. So the assessment experience in that sense needs to be a true self-discovery, and then also thinking about the experience needs to be reflected in a development investment. So let's see how we can appreciate that system that we play in with everything that we've covered today. So at LHH, we explored a couple of the what ifs. So what we're working towards, and we like to do with our clients even today, are these what ifs. So we have, what if we had role agnostic profiles? So we could really give you insights about people and their strengths, their development areas, and you could do development programs, but they don't have to be, if it's for progression, it doesn't have to be tied to a job, because your landscape is always changing. So you can do some succession planning based on that. What if we offered assessment for colleagues as a value proposition? So this is one I'm quite passionate about. So it's sort of thinking about how we sometimes do have other types of value propositions within the organization, but is it an opportunity to really learn about myself, irrespective of having a job that I'm going for or being promoted to, or in a part of a hyper or succession planning program. So can we give this back to people to really understand and grow as an individual and take that insight forward in their roles? Can we dial up real-time feedback? So that speaks to that speed. So can we give people just feedback to say, this is what you need to be doing to help improve or harness your strengths, not always about development, and truly ensure truly connected development. So when you do have that insight, can we have programs that really harness and upskill the individual? So we're passionate about this, and these are areas that we are constantly working with our clients on as well. So I'd like to share with you as a final content really, and then we'll go into some questions and reflections, is the future of assessment at LHH is an evolving point of view, but I want to talk you through this model that we practice and also want to take forward really. So starting at the center of the model, we've got the LHH assessment experience, and we want that to be underpinned by efficient and robust processes. So definitely keeping the science. We're not saying goodbye to that. Keep it, as Jenny mentioned, thinking about the assessment type that you use, the end-to-end process, making sure it's accredited assessment as well through the BPS if you're in the UK. Making the assessment process accessible and inclusive. So have you considered the individual differences? Have we made it about the individual experience and their strengths? And thinking about what is in it for that individual. So we want them to give as much as they can in selection. We understand it's for a role, but if they are not successful, have they learned something? Has there been something there for them as well? In succession planning, what's next for them? So giving back to that individual. And then we've got the context that they play in. So you've got leader context. So what's the context for that leader? The organizational context, what are they playing with in the organizations? Is there particular economic, social, political shifts that the organization's experiencing that we need to be mindful of when we think about fit and progress? And the individual's life context, is this the right time for them? What have they got going on? So thinking about all of that in a holistic way to then inform that holistic human development where we can raise awareness, hit actualization, personal growth, realizing potential, and thinking about what that might mean for the individual from a life perspective. It's a big dream, but I think that's what we strive for, and we wanted to share that with you. So in summary, we have covered a fair bit. So we want to leave you with some summary points, really. So we know AI is here. We must decide where to take it. I've seen some questions pop up around, what's it like at the moment. It is quite experimental at the moment, and there's a lot around seeing what works. The one that gets most traction is speed. So we must see where AI can take us and decide where we want it. We do believe that AI can propel the human-centric and connection aspect of assessment, and that's where we want to focus. And I love that, again, it tied to what you all noted under hope. We need to be mindful of AI limitations. So that's probably where it is still quite exploratory, because assessment and the human experience at work is very important. So you don't want to get the data wrong. You don't want to make wrong decisions. So that's why it's a slow growth, but it's one where we need to focus and get it right, really. So neurodiversity is diverse. I think we can all appreciate that. And active inclusion and increasing comfort with disclosure and assessment is incredibly important. And then we talked about the experience of assessment that needs to keep that individual at the heart. So there are two big topics, and hopefully we've brought them into some perspective for you and given you some food for thought, really. And we would love to continue the conversation with you, and I've created an action station. So this is for you to take away. Is there an opportunity for some self-education? So we all could learn a lot more on these topics. Even when I was talking to some of our experts in the field and within the organization, it's so fast evolving and so much to learn that we can all educate ourselves. There is Neurodiversity Awareness Week commencing on the 12th of, no, next week, 18th of March. So that's an opportunity to learn more about neurodiversity as well. Gather feedback on the experience of your candidates and leaders. So that's something we could start doing now. How do they feel? What would they like the future of assessment to be? I know when I interviewed a few leaders for this session, I got very, very interesting answers as to what they actually find useful and what would be beneficial for them as well. So showcase your diversity, and you can start to sketch out how AI can help you take assessments to a more holistic human development as well. And finally, we are here, so continue the conversation with us. Would love to hear your story.
I'm just going to stop sharing because there's actually quite a few interesting questions
Lovely.
there.
Lovely.
So let me.
Next slide was really just to say, what are your questions and
Oh
reflections?
yeah, sorry.
And our contact slide. So that was all.
I shouldn't say it in real life.
Yeah.
Okay.
So exactly. So there is and we'll share the contact. But carry on, Jenny. Have you been
Yeah,
monitoring?
no, I can see one of the questions is, what are your thoughts on gamified assessment? Are they helpful to use with neurodiverse candidates? So it depends on what kind of neurodiversity or conditions that they have. So for someone who is who struggles with words, possibly that can be something that's quite useful. But for someone who's autistic, you need to think about what if they don't understand the purpose of this assessment, and they can get quite frustrated or quite stressed about it. So this is why I meant that understand what is it first, and then think about what is the best way to help them. We've seen, gamified assessment works, so there's no reason why it can't, but you just need to think about what is the reason, and that's with all assessment. First of all, understand the purpose of the assessment, then understand the challenges that those individuals could find difficult, and then adapt your assessment for it. So that's one. I can see Precious has another question. I support candidates who have ADHD and really gets nervous about interview. Do you have any suggestions on what they can do to prepare for it? So I think it's about having a conversation with them first to find usually, what do they find nervous? Is it, understanding which element they find it stressful or that they find it nervous would be the first thing to do. But also usually, as I said, if you walk them through that process, it generally helps them to understand what to expect, because typically we're nervous about things because we don't know what we're going to see. So by walking them through step by step will really help them understand and understand, what is to come, what is to expect as well. And to see, I know there are questions on the chat as well. So I'm going to answer the question of in my organization. So it's your 6th week, well done, in new people manager role. Many individuals have been there in excess of 2 years and started to declare neurodiverse needs. Only after performance management discussion have come about. How do you set up a process to manage multiple disclosure effectively and make short-term, long-term, and medium-term adjustment to practice and process? So that's a really interesting one. So where I previously worked, they've actually see neurodiverse almost on the parallel to disability. So by that, I meant that they have to make adjustments for these neurodiverse individuals at work. So it could be how their desktop at work is set up to really help them to adapt to their neurodiverse conditions. So in a similar way, you can think about, well, how do you normally make adjustments for people who has disability? We're not saying, there's a right way or wrong way to do that, but you need to possibly think about the bigger picture first. How do we want to ensure that they get the support they need? Because at the end of the day, that's what you want, right? Because only when they get the support they need can they excel. So, and this is probably the way we think about talent in general. It's just different groups have different needs. And so thinking sometimes organizations, what they do as well is try to understand, what type of neurodiverse conditions they have the most, start addressing from that, and then work down to different areas. So in software companies that I've seen, as well as in one engineer companies that I've seen, they have quite a lot of autistic talents within the organization. So they actually do brilliant things to adapt to their needs to really help them excel, because they know actually that is a huge population within their workforce, and it makes sense for them to do a lot of adoption to what they need. So it's really trying to understand the landscape, but also trying to understand their needs. And in pretty much similar to the Unite efforts, essentially, you want to try and find out what do people from ethnic diverse backgrounds tend to find it challenging and trying to adapt to those. I don't know if that's answering it the way you want it, but in general, we need to probably think about long term first and then work out the kind of medium and short term. There is a question about, you mentioned social intelligence. What's your definition on this, Narita?
Yeah, I can take that one. Thanks, Kath. Lovely to see you. I was going to say, this came from a HRB article that I was looking into, the research as well. So I can send you the article, of course. What they're referring to here is what we would typically call emotional intelligence. So looking at understanding people's behavioral cues and making responses that are aligned with that. So being quite mindful of emotional and social cues that people might be giving off. Also, there's an aspect of being culturally sensitive about what different cues might mean for different cultures as well. Hope that helps.
I'm also picking up questions in the chat. So Edwin asked, with the importance of ED&I in the workplace, my question is, does AI assessment build in accessibility, or is it something that we need to consider ourselves? It depends on the data, right? That they include, because at the end of the day, the more diverse data they have within their data bank, and it depends on how the algorithm is created, those would have an impact. So it's almost speaking to that provider to understand, what does your data set looks like? How many different, different, I guess, background you include? For example, what does your data looks like? Is it inclusive, or is it predominantly one set of people, in which case that probably doesn't always translate across the different areas? Narita, any thoughts?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it depends on the changes that you're making or the help that you're drawing from AI to impact the process, being very mindful of inclusion as you make those each incremental changes and thinking about the population that it might impact. And as Jenny said, the data that goes into it. Um, I hope that's helpful. And then I'll just take the psychometric test using literature. So our recommendation is around BPS accredited leadership assessments. We practice Hogan quite a lot, but yeah, anything that's BPS accredited. And I think Jenny had a really lovely part about some of our criteria as to where we use them. Does AI use similar psychometric tools? Yeah, good question, but it's almost so AI is not a part of the psychometric tools per se. So it's not, the tools haven't changed, and the ones that are BPS accredited, those instruments are still the same. It's more how you interject AI in the background. So if I've taken a psychometric, I've done an interview, and I've done a behavioral task, are those data points merged, and are the insights therefore in the background meaningful? So it's not that the tools are necessarily using AI, it's what you do with the data.
Although I won't be surprised
Yeah,
if they start implementing it so that they can churn through that data a lot quicker, trying to find out whether there's a link, whether what
exactly.
it can predict.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And
I
would you
think
see it with, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, I think we're still quite early in this process, and I do believe that a lot of organizations or a lot of psychometric companies are experimenting on what could AI do for them.
Exactly. And I just realized under one of those examples are things like video interviewing or some kind of gamification assessments. So they would be used, they would be the first off the bat
Yeah.
really, to think about how they can implement AI in the background.
Actually, I know that not leadership assessment, but when it comes to sifting, it's being used quite a lot. And what we're finding in that example is that there's a lot of trial and error to understand that, how accurate it is in predicting. I think that relates to Edwin's question, are there recommendation sites or AI tools we could look at for leadership development? Currently, there isn't one as such. And do you recommend we put individuals at ease when introduce AI assessment and should be part of this more blended approach? I think the best practice is probably explaining clearly what, how they will be assessed so that you're transparent. We do advocate for transparency because it puts everyone at ease and there's no surprise, you'll find. But going back to the example I was thinking was that actually one particular company found that they were at fault when they didn't include the data set of a group that they're assessing, and therefore the result didn't quite translate. So we are learning from other people's mistake to understand actually what's the best practice.
Exactly. So we can come back to that question perhaps.
Yeah,
do you know?
Interesting question. We cannot see or track AI models learning because it's a secret algorithm. How can we trust that it will not show bias against a certain group or over time, and not reflect our company's values? So this is where the provider should actually help you or provide a adverse impact study. So we do that with our current psychometrics as well. When clients require us to understand actually, does your assessment process negatively impact a particular group? So what we will look at is across everyone that we've assessed, does any particular group comes off worse or better And that way you can actually understand over time. But of course, that would happen over time because then you have enough data to actually do analysis to understand has adverse impact happened. And generally, if you have the resources, do that predictive study in terms of utilizing this set of assessment. Does that actually predict future success? Because if it doesn't, then there's no point utilizing that assessment. And hopefully that assessment also reflects that company value as well. But these should all be part of your discussion with the assessing company at that start of the conversation before anything's designed or utilized. And that is what we call the kind of best practice as well. So, any questions you've thought, Rita?
Just around best practices and assesscandidates.com, but I am conscious of the time as well.
Oh,
So,
yes, true.
but
I'm too excited answering all the questions. I actually
no,
forgot the
don't
time.
worry, that's great. So we might have to come back to you. So, do you know much about assesscandidatesjenny.com? Maybe we can
No,
come back to you, and then best practices we'll put into the follow up as well. So thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be in touch, and yeah, so do get in touch, and thank you so much for your time.
thank you, everyone.